if we could, you could introduce yourself and share something about yourself.
I'll start. My name is Fenice. I was born in Puebla, Mexico, and I migrated here when I was 13 years old. I crossed the desert, not as big as this one. I was very blessed to be able to make it here safely with my family. I've been in the country for about 24 years now. Colorado is home to me, and I have DACA now. I'm on my 5th DACA, and it's an honor to work for Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition. I document cases of ICE activity and ICE incidents or anything related to immigration enforcement.
My name is Sulma Mendoza, and I am an immigration attorney at the Justice and Mercy Legal Aid Center. It's called JAMLAC for short. We provide full pro bono, meaning free legal representation to people who are struggling with poverty and oppression, specifically in the family law area and immigration. I came to the U.S. when I was a year old. I was born in Juarez, Mexico. I know the life of an immigrant. I too was fortunate to cross the borders at a time it wasn't as strict with my family. And I've been in Colorado my life. I also see Colorado as my home.
I'm Tessa Nelson. I am the Community Resources and Activities Coordinator for Spring Institute, which is a nonprofit here in Denver providing services for immigrants and refugees. So we do lots and lots and lots of stuff, degree accreditation and translation services, advocacy groups, and my role as the youth coordinator is to provide opportunities to help immigrant and refugee youth thrive and become their best selves. I went hiking today and now I'm here.
I'm Shavna. I came to the U.S. when I was 9 years old. I'm also in 8th grade, and I'm also a refuge.
So with that, I want to open it up to the audience for questions that you have for our panelists.
Why do you feel it's important for us to see this performance now?
I can start. So as an immigration attorney, I know the stories, I know the faces, I know names, and so a lot of times in our media, we're dehumanized. We put labels on immigrants, call us, say they're illegal, they're breaking the law, they're criminals, and it's really important to know their stories, and stories are powerful. So it is really important, I think, to be able to tell the story of all perspectives, of all parties involved, including the rancher and all of his struggles as well, and it really does humanize the immigrant story.
Would anyone else like to respond to it?
I can say that people are still dying, so it's more timely than, I wouldn't say it's like a trend. It's just a reality that has unfortunately been happening in our border. We're still losing lives. I've received reports of many of the things that I saw in the play, so I definitely think that it is so important that people see this, because if someone here in the audience maybe works for Border Patrol, you never know, and then to take that message and know that their actions can save lives, I think that's so important.
Two of the lines that stood out to me the most throughout the play were that as immigrants, you're always on the wrong side to somebody. And I found that to be incredibly powerful, along with nobody wants them until they're dead. And I think that to add to what you both shared, that's why it's so timely to see a show like Refuge. We don't have to wait until immigrants are dead before they matter. And we see what happens in a day in the life of America when immigrants don't show up. And there's more than that. There's a story, there's people, there's families. So thank you for that. Other questions?
In a perfect world, how would you think that these kinds of movements between peoples should be managed that would be humane as management?
That's a great question. So for those that didn't hear, the question was, in a perfect world, how to have a more humane immigration system?
Our they're inhumane, they're complex, they're targeted. And I think in a perfect world, there'd be definitely a better process and a more humane process. There's arguments back and forth as to open borders, not open borders. There's arguments on other sides, but I will tell you, in a perfect world, they would be treated as humans. At least that would be the beginning of it. Each one is processed as a human being, and not just numbers, and not just as, all the focus is always at the U.S.-Mexican border, right? We have a northern border as well, and so that's what I mean by that. I think treating people like humans is just the basic thing we should start to be able to move to a better system.
I also don't have any answers, but I'm moved by the part of the play where the dog welcomes the wolf over the barbed wire, makes him to eat of his body. And I keep coming back to it, and I just wonder what we as a country can kind of learn from that moment, or what we could take from that moment. So it's not an answer to how we should manage immigration, but it is kind of a moment that keeps playing through my head, and a question of what we could learn from that.
So the play, focuses on, the experiences of many people, specifically youth. From the girl's perspective, I don't know how old she was supposed to be in the play or not, but from your side, and I know that you said you're a refugee, and feel free to answer or not. I want to hear more about your perspective, how you're seeing this compared to what your experience is as somebody younger than the majority of the people in the audience, and how we can relate.
It's really different from my experience because when we came at a time where it was basically kind of like peace. Like we came safer. Like it was safer for us to come at that time. Whereas in the play, it was kind of dangerous and people were just dying on the way.
Yeah, and I think that's something that speaks to the complexity of the issue about immigration. There's many ways in which people become undocumented in the U.S. It could be crossing directly the border, it could be overstaying visas, it could be so many other things. And the journey doesn't all look the same. But one of the things that we need to not do is romanticize that journey, because it's often very, very traumatic, and it's passed on to the kids and the kids' kids, and it's something that we carry with us. Other questions?
What's the best thing the everyday person that doesn't live this themselves can do to help the entire situation? Because what can give hope to the future?
Yeah, so that's a great question around a call for action. What can we do in our everyday lives to contribute to this issue?
Well, there's lots you can do. You may find an organization near you that helps or serves immigrants. There are so many.
Can you share a few?
Yeah, I work for Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition, and we are a coalition of about 80 organizations statewide in Colorado who serve immigrants in one way or another. And I know that the organizations that you work with, you're CERT members as well, and it's a very knit community, but there's always something you can do. You may visit immigrants at the Immigrant Detention Center that is in Aurora, Colorado, and you may go and find someone who may have been there for months, maybe without even talking to anybody. And you might be the first one that this person gets to talk to, and you can be there for someone that way. There are churches who open their doors to immigrants, so they may find sanctuary there, and they don't get separated from their families. You can donate money to wonderful organizations like JAMLAC and Spring Institute, who provide pro bono services to immigrants. And just don't be afraid to talk to your friends and talk to your legislators and tell them how important it is that we save lives.
Another thing is that this play is set in Desolation, Texas, and when we're reading the news, it feels far away. But I work 10 minutes down the street. It's not something that's removed from our lives. lives here in Denver at all. Like, there are refugees and immigrants living right here. Like, they are your neighbors. So at the end of the play, that tiny moment where he sets out water and bread and fruit, like, I don't think that you should necessarily set out bread and fruit, but like that gesture, that tiny thing, reach out to your neighbors, figure out who needs help. It's not a problem a couple states south of us. It's a huge problem right here in Denver too. And so find a place to serve and find a place to volunteer or have direct impact on somebody that you know.
Another great organization to be aware of is Casa de Paz. And they welcome immigrants as they're being released from the detention centers. And there's a lot of ways to get involved there, whether providing care packages, writing letters, keeping that human-to-human connection is another great organization to check out. Other questions? Ma'am?
I just have a comment. I know this is about Central American immigrants coming into the United States, but I was thinking about the Ukrainians being taken into Poland and the other Central European countries, and how much easier it's been for the countries to welcome in the Ukrainians than they ever did with the Syrians. And so I'm wondering if the Central American people coming to America, if they were a little whiter, would they be more welcome? And it's just a thought that's going through my head.
And that speaks to an earlier question around, in a humane system, what can we do differently? And it speaks to that we shouldn't racialize our immigration system, where the value of some lives are segmented, and seeing all of us as immigrants worthy of that right to travel, to move. But that's a great critical observation to make of how immigrants are treated differently based on the countries that they come from, the color of their skin, their religion. Any other questions?
I think another kind of underlying theme that maybe like Chicanos picked up a little bit more up on, but was the fact of that identity crisis that was encapsulated by the Border Patrol agent and that sentiment of not knowing which side you're on. And so I'm just curious if you all would speak to how you have navigated both your, Mexicanness or Latino-ness with your Americanness, and what your process of like reconciliation or like assimilation has been, and any advice you have for some navigating that as we speak.
I do get emotional with questions like this because I remember coming here and like learning English as fast as possible, and I would just absorb like movies and music and everything in English so I could pick it up fast. And I just like I would refuse to speak Spanish with my family, and I shortened my name. I have a full name with 4 different names, and I just shortened it so I could assimilate and just like blend in. And I have children now, and I didn't realize for the longest time that I refused to speak Spanish to my own children. And so I'm in that process of coming out of those fears that were embedded in me so much that 20 years later I'm still unpacking.
I definitely relate more to the Border Patrol agent because I came when I was so young. And so I grew up here and I learned English in school and in Spanish. I kept my Spanish because of my parents. So my parents didn't speak English in the home. And so growing up, I felt like I lost a lot of my Mexican identity. And I didn't speak it as well as I have now that I'm older, the Spanish. So sometimes I would feel uncomfortable speaking to some of my relatives because I would say the wrong Spanish words. Yeah, or use the Spanglish more, right? And so what I did, when I started working with a lot of my community, I got my Spanish back. And so working in immigration has inspired me to do so many things. I keep telling my bosses I hope to go to Mexico and go to school there for a year. I could learn. I'm learning a lot of my heritage, and so I did just my own journey to try and reconnect with some of that because I do feel distanced from that. And something that I did learn is that you shouldn't fight your culture, because although I'm here and I speak English really well, they will never let me forget that I am a brown girl. No matter if I have a suit on, no matter what I do, no matter the fact that I'm an attorney, I'm the director of a nonprofit, I will always be a Mexican girl. And so that's something you should just hold on to and be really proud of.
Reframing it, how do you navigate these many identities that you come with as a refugee, being in Denver?
To be honest, I feel like I've also lost some of my identity. Like to my cousins or relatives, we usually talk in English rather than Dari or Persian. And I feel like something that we should like learn is to never like forget your identity and who you are. Like just try to keep it and like practice it more as you go.
I'd like to add to that as well. Something that I'm coming to realize is that we're coming to put party over nation. And that's something that's really dangerous, that we need to be aware of how do we come to embody America's values? Because regardless of the faults of our country, which there are many, it's also allowed for so much to happen. And how do we hold both the good and the bad at once? And from that, how do we embody our values and come together to reimagine what those look like in the 21st century? And to see our differences not as something that divides us, but as something that's really special that allows us all to grow together. So thank you for that question. It's a really great question. Others?
In the play, Sarah was a victim of crime in American soil. Is there any protections for people like Sarah? Because I know their community is victims of a lot of crime, but we are so afraid to speak because this distrust of our government, our police. Is there any protections?
There is a visa, it's called the U visa, which is for victims of crime. So if somebody has been a victim of a crime, not all crime qualifies, but major crime, so felony assault, sex assault, domestic violence, trafficking, it's a variety of type of crimes that qualify. I thought about that situation with Sarah. And the difficulty, I mean, it's an amazing option. However, there's barriers to it as well. I thought about Sarah, who didn't report it. So one of the requirements to be able to get the U visa is that you have to report it. And the outcome of it doesn't matter. Whether they pursue charges doesn't matter, but at the minimum, they need an investigation. And so as the play was going and thinking, oh, she didn't report, she wouldn't be able to apply for this U visa. And so one thing that we're really trying to do at JAMLAC and these panels is just give information to the community and encourage them. It's not that easy to report. I mean, it would be almost impossible for her to report. The consequences are so severe for her to do that. And she's young, and all she's trying to do is get home. So it's just really important to provide that kind of information. But the one thing I did think was the U visa. So there's options out there for our community. It's just getting the knowledge out there and information.
Additionally, a lot of the areas where refugees and immigrants are being resettled, I'm thinking specifically of East Colfax, are incredibly violent neighborhoods that have incredibly high rates of crime. So I think it's pretty messed up that folks who are leaving countries because of fear from safety are placed into areas where their safety is at risk. And because whenever you feel insecure, in your bodily safety, it's easier to become a criminal because you have to protect yourself and you have to kind of live the life that's present in that neighborhood. So I think that another enormous problem is just like creating safe spaces for refugees to come once they're here.
I also would like to add something about that, because unfortunately I have received reports through our hotline of people who have experienced some sort of abuse in the hands of Border Patrol agents or ICE agents. And then unfortunately, I have seen people that, like cases of people who reported that, and instead of that crime being investigated, they were deported. A few cases like that that I'm keeping a track of, because we need accountability for everything that has happened, and we need eyes on eyes. we need to just constantly be looking at what they're doing, and if someone reports something, it's so important that the community comes and surrounds them and gives them support in that we can make sure people have a fair investigation.
Others?
Well, I just wanted to honor Dawson's question, because Laura, when you had said that you were part of DACA, she was like, what is DACA? So could you explain to the audience what is DACA?
Thank you for that question. It is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It is an executive action that President Obama took, and it gives children who came here undocumented protection from deportation, and it only covers you for 2 years, and you have to pay a fee of $500 when you apply. It's not a simple application. It took me 1 year to put my first application together, because you have to show proof of everything that you've done since you entered the country. So I know many people who, like, they didn't want to keep track of anything because they were trying to get by, and then they couldn't prove that they were here. So I do have a work permit that comes with that, and a social security number that it's almost like everyone else's, except I cannot get benefits from the government. And let's see what else. And I also cannot leave the country. So that's a really big barrier. And I just, yeah, it feels like you're trapped, like you don't have freedom. And if I was to get a DUI outside, I can lose my DACA. I would lose it, definitely. And so, yeah, that's all I can think about that. So that's why I'm celebrating that I'm on the 5th one, because every time you get that renewal, it's tears of joy.
Can I just add a little bit to that? There's that balance of good and bad things about our immigration system, right? It's helped so many people with DACA, but it's also very difficult because you have to prove that you graduated high school or got a GED to be able to qualify for DACA, and they do a stringent criminal background. And so looking at that, it's like they're just wanting to give the best the opportunity to be able to get a work permit, which is unfair. It's a very stringent process, especially if you make a mistake, it kicks you out of that. One big thing for immigration attorneys when DACA first came on was that we were hesitant to have people apply because of the fact that we found was kind of like, we were like, what if this is a registry? I mean, that's how, we're thinking, oh my gosh, they want all this information of all these kids that are here, and they don't know that they're here. Well, now that they know that they're here. It's a huge risk that they take every 2 years when they apply, because they could be denied. And so it's just really difficult. It's a really good program, but at the same time, it's a really difficult program.
And I just want to quickly add that it's a big risk for someone to apply for DACA, but imagine the risk of the parents. And the parents so lovingly support their children to apply for DACA, even though they themselves are putting themselves at risk as well.
So although they'll have them in different languages, you can print and fill them out, but regardless, you have to submit those in English. And again, it's a very complex system. That's why legal representation is huge for our community.
Anyone else?
Can you become a citizen after being here all these years and doing DACA? What is the next step for you?
What comes after DACA? Is there a pathway to citizenship?
Bearer of bad news. No, it unfortunately no. It is not a pathway to residency, which often is known as the green card, and it's not a pathway to citizenship. So literally, you just have to renew it every 2 years to keep your work permit. Yeah, it's just a Band-Aid, is what it is. It's just a Band-Aid.
So what is the pathway to citizenship then?
So the question was, what then is the pathway? Is there a pathway?
Oh, there's a variety of pathways to it. They're all very complex. I could speak about the different options for hours. However, for someone who has come into the country unlawfully, they're very, very limited, almost none. And so if someone coming into the country, the way you come into the country really changes your options on what possibilities you have in the future. But to be able to come in without permission or undocumented, there's almost none. The options are the T visa if you're a victim of trafficking, or a U visa, because they have waivers that you can file and ask for forgiveness from the government. Say, please forgive me for coming into the country unlawfully, and then it allows them to be able to take the steps towards getting their citizenship. Also, asylum seekers, actually, that's a lawful way to come to the country. Asking for asylum at the border is lawful. However, there's about 1% of asylum cases that get approved. So it's very, very slim for asylum. And a lot of people that were coming, in these past few years are seeking asylum, and so it's very difficult. It's not an easy way, unfortunately, to be able to get it. I'll just give one small example. If you come into the country on a tourist visa, so I'll just give this example. You come into the country on a tourist visa, you have permission from the U.S. government to come in. You're supposed to come in only as a tourist. They give you about 6 months to stay here. Let's say you stay here, you reunite with family, you're like, I'm just not gonna go back until you overstay your visa. Let's say in a few years you meet somebody who has status, whether they're resident or a U.S. citizen, and you get married. And you marry for love, you have a family, he can then petition, the U.S. citizen spouse can petition for the immigrant, and they can get residency and things like that. So that's one option of being able to get legal status. But again, if you came unlawfully, there are almost zero options to be able to apply, which I think demystifies a lot of things about having anchor babies. You've heard of people coming here and they just want to have their babies here. It's not that easy. It's not that easy. They would have to wait until they're 21. Children have to be 21, but also if you came unlawfully, you would have to ask for a waiver because your parent, the parent came unlawfully, but the parent has to wait outside of the country to get approved for that waiver. So if you came unlawfully and you apply through your son, who's a U.S. citizen, and you leave the country, you get punished for 10 years. So you would have to wait outside the country for a long time. So that also demystifies this idea that they come here just to have kids so they can get paid.
And that happened to my mother because she was here until 2017. She started getting very sick, very ill, and we could not find help here for her. Like, we could get maybe emergency something, but she couldn't get the specialized care that she needed. So, like, the day after Christmas Day, she went back to Mexico. And she said, I know that this is a big risk, but I'd rather, like, being with you from afar than I die, instead of me dying, and then you lose me forever. And so we supported her journey because we knew that my little sister, who is a citizen, and she was about to turn 21, so we were hopeful. We said maybe she can come back. And we were waiting for my sister to turn 21, so happily. And then when she did, we talked to an attorney who told us that my mom now has to wait 10 years outside before she can come back, even though my sister is a citizen and could petition her. So it's extremely hard to have a parent who is sick and is on the other side of the border, and you don't know if they're okay or if they're not, if they're sick, and you want to take care of them. It's really hard.
Our system has been separating families for a very long time. Very, very long.
What's the waiting list of a domestic violence victim or a victim of a crime who, let's say, they report the crime and they, obviously, there's investigations, we know that take 2 to 3 years. So they finally apply, what's the waiting list to get a permit or a visa?
Oh, that hurts my heart, because the U visa is a huge part of what we do at JAMLAC, providing the services. So maybe 5 years ago, the wait list was about 5 years, which to a person that's been in this country for a long time, 5 years is nothing. What's going on with the U visa is that Congress only allows 10,000 U visas per year. And the entire 10,000 U visas per year in the entire country. But when we first started doing U visas, the clients were waiting about 8 to 12 months to get an approval, which was amazing. And now, today, it's 16 years. 16 years.
Did you say you can't go out of the country, so you can't go to Mexico to visit your mom?
That's right.
In such a taxing environment that's so personally challenging, how do you take care of yourselves to keep going?
I'm a person of faith. I like to remind myself that every day I have to remind myself that I'm a child of God and that I do have value, and that all those things that I hear about me, that they're not true. And that just keeps me going. And I also just think about all the people that are suffering and all the people that are needing help, and that gives me a great deal of energy to want to continue doing more and being involved in helping, and that gives me joy, helping.
Yeah, so our organization is a lot of self-care. So happy hour is really happy hour. We do chocolate, we do cupcakes, love it. We check in with each other. We started taking every other Friday off as self-care day. Don't work at all, do something fun. But my clients, I mean, at the same time that their stories are really, really difficult, I didn't get where I am now alone. I had mentors, I had help. My parents as well. I learned a few years ago that my mother got her citizenship through Catholic Charities, which was amazing, because then it led down the path for her children. And so I think it's my obligation to continue to help other people get to where they want to be.
Therapy's great. I feel really lucky because I feel like I have a very joyful job, for every horrible thing that happened, the baby that was crying, I get to sing songs with him. Pretty happy job a lot of the time. And then for the horrible times, like you both talked about, leaning on your networks and going to therapy and going outside are all really great ways to de-stress.
To be honest, I don't pay taxes.
You said I don't pay taxes.
Anyone else? If I understood you correctly, you're asking about what do we do about the permanent economic underclass that we're creating of undocumented workers. That in a lot of ways we open the door for them to come in and be relegated to those menial, low-paying, exploitative jobs. What do we do about that?
I definitely agree with that. Some of the harsh immigration penalties for hiring undocumented was more leaning towards employers. It's supposed to be. You're not supposed to hire them, exactly, but the enforcement is the issue. So it's about enforcement. So the laws are supposed to go against the employer not hiring undocumented, but they go after the employees. And so the enforcement is part of the issue. There's a great organization called Towards Justice, and they actually work with immigrants who have been taken advantage of. They do have rights under the state laws to be able to go against employers who are underpaying them or not paying them at all, because that's where they find themselves. They will work for weeks and then don't get paid, and Towards Justice is an organization that helps them be able to get at least some of the money back and hold the employers accountable. But there's also the fear of reporting. And so a lot of them are like, oh, I'm just not gonna say anything because you did threaten to call ICE on me. I think it's about the enforcement part. I think that would help.
I also want to say that it's not always so grim. Just through my experience, I've seen employers who take advantage of workers, but I've also seen employers who just need workers, and they also want to help someone because they know they have a family to take care of. So I'm also very, very grateful for people who opened the doors to my dad so that he could find employment and take care of his children once we were here. So it's not black and white.
Right, the good and the bad. It's a hard balance.
It really is. And trying to figure out how do we hold that balance is really the challenge before us as a country. How do we hold all the positivity and the hope that our country carries with it, but still not be afraid of digging into the problems, and to not delve into the problems trying to place blame on people, but really trying to figure out how do we solve these issues in a compassionate way. So the last thing that I'll say though is that I hope Refuge serves as a mirror, because the measure of any great democracy is by how compassionate it is, how we treat the most vulnerable members in our society. And if this is any indication, we have a lot of work to do. But I believe that we can come together to figure it out, because we have no other choice. What I learned from my immigrant parents is that we don't have the luxury of giving up. We have to survive. We have to struggle against all odds. And that's something that is truly miraculous about the human spirit that we saw today in Refuge. And with that, I hope you all have a great evening, a great night now, the rest of your weekend, and thank you for joining us.